Welcome to In Studio from Simply Timeless. I'm Jay Daniels. Bria Skonberg is a multi-talented vocalist and instrumentalist who just released the album Nothing Never Happens. Several years ago, Bria relocated from her home in Chilliwack, British Columbia, to New York City. And since then, she's become well known to audiences not only throughout New York, but also the greater global jazz scene. Recently, I had the pleasure of meeting Bria before a performance at New York's Jazz Standard. Join us for the conversation as Bria and I discuss her own journey of musical discovery. I was reading your website, and you had a wonderful definition for your special connection with this music. So we'll start off with this. Why jazz?
I think you may have read this. You see, I have a bit of an obsession with flying. I like to feel free. And with jazz, I feel like that's the closest I can get to flying. When you have a rhythm section that's cooking underneath you and it's just like having the biggest wings, and there's nothing like it. You just feel like you're flying when you're playing jazz.
And I was listening to your recordings. In fact, I was introduced to your work a couple of years ago. For many jazz artists, their music is still new for me, and was very impressed with how you were able to, very easily serve as an instrumentalist, as a trumpeter, but also double as a vocalist. Very few people are able to accomplish that. They're either a vocalist or an instrumentalist, not both. But in thinking about your sound, I think most people would say that you are a jazz and blues artist. But those labels, I think, can be sometimes deceptive. They don't fully describe, I think, who you are. So think about this like a recipe. You have a dash of this, a pinch of that. What are some of the key ingredients that make up your musical sound?
Wow, that gets deep real quick because I want to go right back to the roots, as I like to do with my music as well. I mean, one of the key ingredients for me was that I was introduced to the music of Louis Armstrong and Jelly Roll Morton very, very early on because of my hometown, which is called Chilliwack, and it's in British Columbia, Canada. And there is a lot of heart there. I think my music has a lot of heart to it. There's a spirited public school band program in Chilliwack, which I was very fortunate to be a part of. And I think that, again, a good sense of spirit. I like music that is built from the bottom up. I like a drum kit to have a lot of, a bass kick drum going on. I want music that makes you shake your butt a little bit, at the essence of it. And really work its way up. Yeah, and get your feet moving and work its way up to your heart. And, those are a lot of the ingredients. I think everywhere I get to travel, I pick up, different sounds. Maybe there's a different symbol in a different culture, or there's a certain sort of harmony that you hear. And I always have my ears open to those sorts of ingredients, like you say, and try to put them into my own music. And also listening. I'm a millennial, so I listen to a lot of different kinds of music. Jazz was not my first love. I grew up listening to 60s baby boomers rock. My parents loved Elvis and all that. I actually really love the Bee Gees and disco. My older brother, yeah.
Well, early or late Bee Gees, because they had a totally different sound of the 60s.
Wow, that's a good question.
But you mentioned disco Bee Gees in the 70s, though.
Well, okay, the songwriting, some of the mellow stuff, but of course, I had Saturday Night Fever vinyl. I did listen to that a lot in high school. Yeah. And I mean, you're asking, so I'm going to tell you all the ingredients. My older brother played Celtic fiddle songs, so we would always go around to these competitions here, Irish waltz, jigs, and reels. That was a big part of my experience listening to, and also just being in a community that loved music. I loved hip hop music. I loved pop music. I loved the Spice Girls. I liked a little bit of everything. I loved, I've always enjoyed listening to everything. And I do treat it like food. I mean, if you listen to something and, unless you have an allergic reaction, listen to it again and try to play it. To really get inside the music helps you understand and respect it for what its main spices are.
And speaking from a food reference, your music is quite palatable. And you have done numerous recordings over the years. When did you first start recording? If I remember, it was about 10 years or so ago was the first album that I could find. Is that about right?
So there's kind of part one and part two to this answer, because I moved to New York City in 2010, and that just before that, I released my first solo album in Vancouver, and that was called Fresh. And then 2010 and forward, I recorded with a group called Random Act Records, and I put out 5 albums since then. Now, the first time I recorded was when I was 17 in my parents' living room with my Dixieland band called the 51st Aid at the time. Also, we renamed the Big Bang Jazz Band. But I've recorded at least 15 albums with 2 bands that I had based out of the Pacific Northwest that played a lot in this traditional jazz scene. And that was an incredible experience. And then as I've started to go out, I guess when I started to make recordings under my own name, that's when the other spices started to work their way in.
You have been one of many musicians who have made the trek, this time from the West Coast, all the way to New York. As a musician trying to gain your footing in the city, and you are not the only one who's trying to do this, obviously, but as one who's trying to get a foothold, trying to find your place, surely there were challenges along the way.
Absolutely. But I prefer the interesting path. I like an interesting life. Actually, through those traditional jazz festivals, a lot of them spanned up and down the West Coast. We won't get too deep on this, but there was a revival in the 1940s and 50s of that style of music that spurned a lot of jazz festivals and clubs. And so the festivals are where musicians really get a chance to hang out. So even when I was maybe over 10 years ago, I met John Eric Kelso, who's one of the main trumpet players with Vince Giordano's Nighthawks. When I moved to New York, he started kind of giving me his leftover gigs, which were nice. He really helped me out. Warren Vacher, I met in that same scene. He became one of my mentors here. And so by the time I moved to New York City, I already knew quite a few people, and I made a couple of very specific trips to come in and meet a lot of people and sit in. But also, when I first moved here, it was just kind of a changing of airports. I was already doing a lot of traveling as like a swing musician all-star at different places. So I was still kind of in and out for the first year, but ultimately, took the opportunity to say, people here don't necessarily know what my specialty is. And so if they say, can you play, I don't know, Freddie Hubbard's Red Clay? I'm like, when's the gig? Yes. Is it in a couple weeks? Sure. I will work on that. And that's exactly it. You shed. And that's what New York's all about, learning every day. And I still am.
And New York obviously is home for you. And you had mentioned that this particular performance that you're doing tonight, we're recording this at the Jazz Standard. And you said this was the first time that you had 3 nights in a row here in the city. It must be gratifying to see that you are in such demand after having worked so hard on this and still so young at this. The
first gig I did under my own name here in New York City was at a place called the Metropolitan Room, and there were maybe 8 people there, and 5 of them were my close friends.
God bless you.
And I paid the band, and I went home and said, what do I do now? And I started to kind of figure out more about, what makes you unique in this city, and how to bring that together in a way that it would attract audiences and such. At that time, I put together, okay, well, I do play trumpet and I do sing, and that's pretty special. So I made a specialty show about trumpet players that played with vocalists of the swing eras and did a lot of classic material there. So I really had to put the magnifying glass. I'd been searching outwards for inspiration, but I had to start looking inwards and looking at myself again and going, how am I going to make this work? And how do you provide yourself as unique in a city that is built on millions of people that are that same way?
What is it that you think makes you unique?
Well, actually 6 months into moving to New York City, I met Lou Soloff, and he said, look, somebody's always going to play faster, somebody's going to play higher. In a chance like New York, you have to figure that very special thing out. And I thought about it, and what brought me solace at that time was, I think I'm the only trumpet player here from Chilliwack. And as random as that sounds, it grounded me in a way that made me go, okay, I've still got my spark, I've still got my heart, like, what interests me? And then I just continued to go on and find and explore things that genuinely interested me and try to put them together in a really interesting way that sounded good. And again, surround myself with people that continue to challenge and inspire me. Like, there's such an amazing pool of musicians here in New York City, and the people that I'm playing with, Darian Douglas, the drummer, we've been playing together for about 8 years. We've grown up a lot together, and there's a lot of trust there. And so he's been certainly instrumental in helping me find my sound.
We're speaking with Bria Skonberg, our in-studio guest from Simply Timeless. And your most recent release is Nothing Never Happens, and you put this one out yourself. It's an independent release, and when we had first met, it was back at Jazz Congress, the very first session of the day in the Appel Room, and it was a session featuring Wynton Marsalis, talking about, how important swing is to jazz music. And I was looking to my left, and this lady had sat down next to me, and I said, should I know who this is? She looks familiar. And lo and behold, it was you. And at the time, you were telling me about this album that you were looking to release sometime later this year. And then I got the notice from the promoter that the album was soon coming out. And I listened to it, and you mentioned all of these special ingredients. And I think everything that you talk about, from your growth in the city, from your exploration of music, I think a lot of that is found in this very album, Nothing Never Happens. But let's start with the name.
About 2 years ago, I mean, I knew that the white noise of everything that's been going on in the world, politics, can't avoid it, can't try, was overwhelming, to say the very least. And the barrage of information it just felt like that. Nothing never happens. It's just go, 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 stop. You can't stop it. And so I needed to really take myself off the grid, and I went on some writing retreats. I shut out all sounds, actually, for a minute, and just sat at my piano and said, okay, process your feelings about it all and see what happens and see what comes out. And that's been the basis of the sound for this whole record. The side where the phrase "nothing never happens" originated is from years of traveling with all these bands and going around the world, and inevitably, and we've all been there are travel delays. Things go wrong. You lose luggage, you lose instruments, get broken, your band members don't show up, or they're late, or whatever. And the through line is you just have to keep going, and something will happen. Nothing never happens. Like, time has not stopped because one of these things have gone wrong. You have gone through different things have happened. You've got to get a different player. I don't know. But something always happens. Thus, nothing never happens. And even though there's a double negative, it's optimistic. You have to remain optimistic and remember that, just keep on moving forward.
Thinking about the songs that are on this album, mixture of originals as well as a couple covers within. Bang Bang being one of the most prolific, I think. But is there an overarching theme that tends to tie all of these songs together?
I think there's a really interesting density and tension that the songs put out there. It's a release. Like, for me, it's a cathartic kind of collage of getting out some frustration and melancholy, and but overcoming those obstacles at the same time. I feel it's actually very empowering. It's triumphant. It's dark. It's bluesy, but ultimately, it's strong at the same time. And I think finding that light within the darkness, chasing after that spark, holding on to it, and continuing to keep on for what you believe in. I mean, those are all things that I feel when I'm performing the music.
If I can just dissect one of the songs I was listening to, So Is the Day, which all of the songs are wonderful, vocals and instrumentals. But there's something very unique about So Is the Day. I think it's in C minor. It's definitely in a minor key. And it almost starts off like just a very soft sort of delivery. The lyrics, I love you, but I can't have you. And it's almost as though you're trying to hold it inside and you're just trying to get the words out. And then by the end, it's a full fortissimo with the entire ensemble. And you're just telling all of the world, this is how I feel about this. You mentioned going on these writing retreats. And, I mean, if you're writing these songs, they surely have a connection to you. But even now when you play these songs, do they still speak to you in some way?
So Is the Day is a very special song for me. I wrote it almost a decade ago. And it's somewhat simple in chord structure and melody, but it's deep and it's universal. And I decided to re-record it because we've morphed together. The song has literally been with me through all sorts of things. And it might sound like a love song, but it's not necessarily. And I've been able to channel that song into whatever it is that I've been dealing with at the time. And ultimately, again, does have a very strong, I mean, depending on how you interpret it, can be triumphant ending, overcoming it with other things lingering. But I still love to play it. I play it. No spoiler. Sorry. We're gonna play it. We're gonna play it this set.
I heard it during rehearsal.
Yeah. So, and also knowing that it's still touches listeners in such an amazing way. I mean, that still is one of the most powerful ones that everybody can relate to. And for me, you know, that's what making music is, just being able to say things that words cannot express, and giving the people that don't play music or don't have that foot in the arts, you know, a chance to also experience those feelings.
Thinking about these songs for new listeners who discover these songs, and I think of the many women who may be still daunted, though, by thinking that jazz is a man's world, and then they hear your music and hear how it speaks to people, and they might think, how can I use my gifts, my talents, to speak to someone else? What would you say to them as they try to find their own way, as you once did several years ago?
Just do it. Just start now. Get into it. Do it. Don't doubt for a second. Go. Because there have been generations. So this is our great-great-grandparents' music. You know, jazz was in its inception 120, 30 years ago. And there were always women that were a part of it. They just didn't get written up in the history books. They weren't documented. You know, women played together. Of course, I've organized a group in the last couple of years called Sisterhood of Swing that was a tribute to the International Sweethearts of Rhythm. I mean, we need to honor those women and just keep on playing, because what were they working for so hard, you know, for equality and just to be heard. Here in New York City, there's a group called Diva, Sherry Miracle, and everybody there. They're just total pioneers. And I'm not a pioneer. I'm not recreating anything. I am just taking that message forward. And there is a really exciting crop of girl musicians that are coming up right now. They are inspiring me to practice a lot, especially trumpet players, that I'm just so excited about. So it's up to us to network and bond together and support each other. That's a big part of it. There's a great group called the Women in Jazz Organization. My friend Roxy Koss has had a big hand in founding that, and I'm getting involved with that. Just the words of advice are, you know, support each other, keep on going, same sort of thing. Keep your bell up, put lots of air through the horn. Don't focus on the fact that you are a female, but know that you have the support when you need it, if that crosses your mind.
One final thought. When one visits your website and when one looks at the many accomplishments that you've had, there are several. You have played with several key orchestras. You're well known in some of the highest jazz circles. And one could easily say that you are certainly one of the most popular names in jazz music right now. However, I tend to think that you take a little bit more humbly than saying that I'm on the top. But in thinking about all of those things, as an artist, vocalist, instrumentalist, but also as an educator, one who shares your gift of music with so many students around the world, all throughout the year, how is it that you measure your own success?
I'll say that there's a song on the album called Square One, which embodies a little bit of this, because what it is about, you know, you might see accomplishments and you do find, you know, you're climbing up the ladder and you reach the next stage, but once you reach the next stage of what you plan to accomplish, you can already see the next ladder above you and you just continually kind of try to keep going. That's what Square One is about, just kind of always feeling like, obviously the more you learn, there's more to learn. Success for me, you know, I learned a while ago about trying to act in accordance with my core values, whatever it is. One of my core values is I like the feeling of freedom. You know, I do want to think that I am making my own choices. There's a reason I'm my own boss, doing my own thing. And I want to create things at a high level and go to a certain level of success so that I can travel and see my family as often as I want. Those things are priorities to me. Being able to have the freedom of schedule, being able to choose who I work with. Most people don't choose who they work with. I only work with nice people who inspire me, play well. Those are things that I value, and I think that is how I end up kind of shaping my career around that. So success to me is when I have good relationships with my band, good relationships with my family, if, you know, a great group of students that I can continue to inspire, draw inspiration from, and ultimately know that I'm working on the next thing that inspires me. If I have to never stay stagnant. I think if I had I think if I got to a place where I thought I had totally succeeded and didn't have any room to grow, then I actually would have failed.
Bria Skonberg, our in-studio guest this week from Simply Timeless. The new album is called Nothing Never Happens, and it's available now from your preferred music service. For more information on the album and Bria's tour schedule, visit the website briaskonberg.com. Our thanks to the Jazz Standard in New York City for their hospitality and assistance in this project. Until we meet again, I'm Jay Daniels, thanking you for joining us in studio.